Like a Dragon 3 is the single worst game in the entire franchise. According to much of the fanbase, that is. Yeah, ask any average person in the fandom the question, "Hey guy, what's the worst RGG game, man?" And chances are, they will respond with 3. The game has garnered such a sour reputation, and that's for a variety of reasons. Reasons being bad enemy design, a poorly paced story, generally tedious combat, and a few other less significant things as well. You spend a good amount of time browsing the RGG community, and you'll start to see plenty of vitriol towards this game. And yeah, lots of fans have deemed it the bottom of the barrel when it comes to this franchise. But me, personally, I don't exactly agree with the sentiment, but I can definitely understand it, because Like a Dragon 3 is a game that's best described as rough. And while we're on the topic of rough, hoo boy, is this game's combat precisely that. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's absolutely god-awful and irredeemable, no. This isn't Devil May Cry 2 levels of bad, but regardless, the combat is so pretty bad, mainly because it just shows a painfully blatant lack of polish. Apparently, according to some sources I've seen, this game took only 8 months to develop, and honestly, after seeing some of the gameplay, that's not a very hard thing to believe. With the heaping amount of flaws this game has, I feel the best way to articulate them is to separate each flaw and discuss each one individually. Just easier that way, you know? And overall, I'd say there are 4 notable components of the gameplay, of which combine in a way that makes combat insanely frustrating. I will analyze them in order of least annoying to the shit that made me want to rip the hair out of my scalp. And they are as follows: the heat mechanic, damage output, crowd management, and enemy AI. As we all may know by now, heat is one of the franchise's most distinctive features. It's a pretty simple overall concept. Performing various different heat actions will gradually fill up the gauge, opening an opportunity to unleash a variety of brutal special attacks. They're flashy, they're gut-wrenching in the most gorgeous of ways, and they even give the combat some extra mechanical depth, as they are not only a means of dealing lots of damage in an instant, but there's also some nuance with these mechanics, as whatever heat actions you can perform depend on situations that are constantly changing. Any slight adjustment to whatever battle you're participating in can actually be used to your advantage through these hundreds of heat actions. Let me list a few examples. If an enemy grabs you from behind, there's a heat action. If you had just got knocked down near an enemy, there's a heat action there too. And if you're grabbing an enemy near just about any sort of surface, there's a bunch of different heat actions there as well. Heat actions are not only fun to watch, but they actually pose a serious strategic advantage as well, if only that were the case in this game. Yeah, you can still perform those heat actions I mentioned earlier, maybe once or twice per fight, because the heat mechanic in this game is fucking ball sacks, like holy hell. Not only does the heat gauge take for fucking ever, and I mean forever, to fill up, but even the slightest tippy-tap from an enemy can send all the heat you built up tumbling down. Enemies will more often than always grapple you, and when that happens, you can kiss your heat gauge goodbye, as it will drain faster than my will to live as they sit through this monotonous bullshit. And that's not even the only 2 ways to start losing heat. Even if you go more than like 5 seconds without building up any heat, you will start to lose it there too. Okay, before you all get up in arms and start screaming, but Kleiny Klein, you know heat works exactly like this in every other game, right? I'm aware. It just so happens that you lose heat from idling and getting hit. It does work like this in every single game in the franchise, aside from 7 for obvious reasons. But what doesn't happen in those other games is that you lose heat roughly 3 times as fast as gaining it. Like, take a look here for a moment. Notice how painfully slow the gauge fills up. Also notice how much faster it goes down. It's like unless you're stocked up with Toriners or have grinded to unlock every soul upgrade, you're really not going to have a lot of chances to use any of the heat actions. Because once you enter heat mode, you could lose it in an instant. And it's such a shame too, because Like a Dragon 3 does have some of my favorite heat actions in the series. This was also the game that introduced Revelations, which gave players a fun and unique way in acquiring some of these moves. And you wanna know what's so fucking funny? Like, side split in levels of funny? Like, so funny you'll be in stitches for the rest of your life? The problems with the general heat mechanic pale in comparison to these goddamn heat finishers. Oh my good lord, what the fuck kind of bullshit is this? Feel the heat, more like feel the arthritis. Why in God's name do I have to mash the right trigger of all buttons in order to fill the gauge here? That is the worst goddamn button to pick. Hell, I would prefer to mash a damn start button. And yup, you guessed correctly. The gauge feels slow as hell here too. Of course it does. And to add insult to injury, there's a certain amount of time you have to fill the gauge to a certain point or else, well, no heat finisher for you, I guess. I don't quite know what happens when you run out of time because luckily that's never happened to me, but I can only assume that it's nothing pretty. Wait a second, why do I even insist on calling these damn things finishers when they aren't even that? They just happen at completely random points in the fight, with literally no rhyme or reason. It's completely arbitrary, and it gets in the way of what I'm doing. Like, sometimes in the middle of a combo, this fucking thing will just happen, and it'll interrupt the flow of the game. Why? Why? Oh, and they can occur whenever your heat gauge is completely empty, and if that does happen, you'll have to mash, and I mean mash, that right trigger until your finger goes numb. And another reason why these specials kind of blow is because of their rather lacking damage output. But that's also something that just affects the combat system in general. My god, it's a damage output in this game fucking terrible. Every single attack does nothing but chip damage, and it makes combat encounters, especially the boss fights, take a needlessly long time. Even the goddamn heat actions take only but a sliver out of the enemy's health bar. Even if you were to get a full combo off of a boss, which is rare mind you, you'd still be inflicting a very minuscule amount of damage. I mean, just take a look at this clip I found on YouTube that perfectly exemplifies how bad this game's damage output is. Look, Kiryu is butt-fucking this poor man in the corner, going straight ham on his ass, and yet, he only took off about half a bar during that whole sequence. And as far as I'm aware, there are no upgrades that increases your strength, so it looks like you're stuck with this chip damage bullshit throughout your entire playthrough. Really, the only way to do an at least decent amount of damage is to spam throws or use weapons, and that is just really poor game design. With how lackluster the damage in this game is, I really feel like my options are limited. Much of your moveset just becomes obsolete with how little mileage you get out of using them compared to, say, using a weapon or just spamming throws like I already mentioned. Like, why should I bother with any other strategy when literally 3/4 of my moveset just does shitty damage, and I can just do throws all the time? Like a Dragon 3 just doesn't feel very optimal at all. There's just none of that player freedom you get with all the other titles. You'll either be forced to repeat the same strategy over and over to get through encounters quickly, or you'll actually try and utilize the game's mechanics like a normal person, and have nearly every fight be a total slog. Either way, you're gonna get bored very quickly. And if you thought the lack of damage hindered your options enough already, wait until you see just how bad the enemy design in this game is. Poor damage is a problem in and of itself, sure, but what's the one thing that can take a flaw like that and amplify it to the point where everything just becomes intolerable? That's right, bad enemy design. The flaws regarding the heat mechanic and damage output are certainly problems on their own, but when combined with enemy AI as horseshit as this, it all just adds up and results in a completely unbearable combat system. I'm sure most of you already know what the main issue with the enemy AI is, but in case you don't, let me spell it out for you real quick. Imagine a beat 'em up or hack and slash game. You know, the type of game where you're tasked with fighting dozens of enemies on multiple occasions. Now imagine a game like that, but with enemies who are designed to block everything you try to do. And did I say everything you try to do? Oh, I'm sorry, that was an exaggeration. I meant every fucking thing you try to do. Literally your entire moveset is useless because the enemies will just block attack flawlessly. Oh, but Clint, you fucking dumbass. Don't you know you're supposed to circle around enemies and hit them that way? Yeah, okay, sure. But the problem hardly ever attack me. The enemy AI was designed to be so painfully defensive that they don't ever try to attack you. And since you can't attack them, you're gonna spend a majority of the fights just standing around like a stupid ass kid who lost his mom at the airport because, like I said before, your options are severely limited and there's literally nothing else you can do. Other than quick-stepping, throwing or using weapons, there is no fucking way to get around the dumbass blocking. It's just fucking stupid, boring, takes too long, like, oh my god, Like a Dragon 3, why the hell are you so boring? Oh, and by the way, did I mention guard breaking? Yeah, guard breaking. That's it, that's perfect. Kiryu has attacks strong enough to break through an enemy's guard, right? He totally does. But guess what? Oh no, enemies will literally start blocking again, like nothing happened. It's like they had permanent regard or some shit. But Clainster, why don't you just find Komaki and learn some of his schmoves? Where's the old fart? Unlike in literally every other RPG game, where you receive a text message or something whenever a master's in town and ready to train you, Like a Dragon 3 forces your happy ass to go off on a whirlwind adventure and find him yourself. Wow. Oh wow. They locked borderline mandatory moves behind a side quest. This is such a great game. 10 out of 10. Would recommend to any old retard. Anyway, as I was saying, I feel like the way the enemies were designed doesn't really fit a fast, action-packed beat-em-up game such as this. Games like this are about using your skills and moveset to your advantage, and you can't really do that when the enemies won't let you. You're seeing the problem here, right? You see the problem here, right? The enemy design is more of an annoying hindrance than something I would consider to be engaging. And don't get me wrong, Kiryu has a ton of different tools at his disposal. He has a wide variety of awesome moves that would certainly look and feel awesome to use, had the design only allowed you to do so. And I'm really not being hyperbolic when I say that you only have about 3 different strategies to use, which obviously doesn't make for an optimal or even a remotely enjoyable experience. At all. And the fact that the aforementioned Komaki moves feel almost completely compulsory just speaks extra volumes onto how poorly designed this game truly is. And there are bosses such as Tamashiro and Laukalon that further highlight the serious problems with the game's combat. The fact that certain bosses can take up to 15 minutes to beat on hard difficulty, death's not included mind you, like 15 minutes just straight fighting, is absolutely absurd. They are damage sponges, and attack sponges too, apparently. And before people start storming my comment section saying juvenile dismissive bullshit like, har har, get good, let me just state that, for the record, I don't think Like a Dragon 3 is a hard video game. Like, I really didn't die all too much, and I generally didn't have much of an issue beating the bosses and shit. Not even the hardest game in the series, actually, as that merit definitely goes to the first Kiwami game. But anyway, the real issue with Like a Dragon 3's combat isn't that it's hard. The problem is that its incredibly restrictive design philosophy renders much of your arsenal useless, and forces encounters to feel repetitive, and, for lack of a better term, just too fucking long. It's artificial difficulty, if anything. Oh wait, wasn't there another flaw I had to address? As if everything I've spent the past, 10 to 15 minutes discussing wasn't enough? What is it, crowd management? Alright, let's knock that shit down the stairs. Now, obviously, since this is a game that centers around battling large crowds of enemies at once, you should expect to feel overwhelmed at certain points. What you shouldn't expect is to have crowd fights feel like an absolute nightmare because the enemy attack patterns are straight up bullshit. This is mostly a problem with the crowd fights and not the bosses, by the way. Let me just get that out of the way. Anywho, The way enemies attack you in this game feels completely arbitrary. There is literally no methodical reasoning behind their attacks. They just straight up throw their fists at completely inconsistent, dare I say random times. There are also many instances where enemy attacks were either consecutive or even simultaneous with the rest of their cronies. This often led to getting stuck in a sea of bitch slaps where you can't do a fucking thing about it, getting knocked down again immediately after getting up and not being able to do a fucking thing about it, or having them use wall bounding to unleash the Omega Supreme buttfuckaroo combo that you can't do a fucking thing about. Noticing the pattern here? Add an absurd amount of stunlock and knockdown in the mix, and everything just becomes infuriating. Luckily, you eventually, and I do mean eventually, learn moves to help deal with this, like that one revelation that comes in handy so fucking much. But it's a nightmare beforehand, and it's just hardly more manageable afterward. Oh, and by the way, towards the finale of the game, you will frequently encounter enemies with weapons, including guns. Yippee! Now I can get sunlocked and helplessly lose half of my health from across the screen. Isn't this the greatest fucking thing in the world? You know what? I'm done. I just want to get to the story now. Please, for the love of God. So, story. Like a Dragon is a franchise best known for its storytelling, right? I mean, the first two games had a few issues here and there, but since this is their third entry, surely the writers learned from their mistakes, and as a result, a fantastic story came from it. This is not really the case. I will say that 3's story is slightly better than 2's and marginally better than the first one. But having said that, this game has some pretty large issues not present in the previous 2 entries. For instance, unlike the first 2 games, Like a Dragon 3 begins with a huge reveal that pretty much sets the tone for the story prior to spending the first few chapters on a flashback, which leads up to said reveal. But wait, how exactly is that a bad thing? Because the events leading up to that reveal are so slow and milquetoast that I immediately lose any investment in the entire story. Obviously this video is going to contain spoilers, so skip to this point in the video if you want to avoid them. As the title of this topic implies, Kiryu has officially stepped away from the Yakuza life, and goes to run an orphanage in Okinawa with Haruka. Aw, how cute. But unbeknownst to Kiryu, Daigo has been tempted into giving away the deed to the lands that orphanage rests upon, and when he refuses to hand it over, he is shot by Kazuma and Albert Wesker. Wow, Wesker, 2009 was quite the busy year for you, huh? First the Ouroboros, and now this? Man, you was such a piece of shit. I'm glad Chris Redfield had to kill you. You know, he had to punch rocks to do it too. Ha, overused jokes. Aren't overused jokes funny? By the way, there's not only that, but Captain of Okinawa's Ryudo family, Shigeru Nakahara, has also been shot for the same exact reason. What the hell is going on? There's so much mystery, man. People are getting shot left and right. What the fuck is going on? What is going on? But before I can figure out anything else, a flashback occurs, and the first 3 or so chapters focuses purely on Kiryu and his orphanage. Ahem. No. This approach does not work. You cannot do this. You cannot throw such a huge reveal in my face right from the get-go and expect me to give a shit about this daycare crap. And look, it's not that I dislike this daycare stuff conceptually, because I think it's rather sweet. And it really fleshes out Kiryu's character, and shows a bit more to his wholesome and caring side. It's just that with all these characters getting shot and this whole land fiasco going on, it's really not crazy to think that this orphanage shit is just kinda getting in the way. Maybe if they didn't include such a dramatic and enticing scene right in the very beginning, I could have given this stuff some more leeway, but nah. Let's just toss some of this kitty shit in your face, while the player is completely aware that some sinister plot is unfolding. Surely they won't lose any interest in the main story or anything, surely no. But hey, look on the bright side, it seems that Sayama has returned. Ooh, wow. Maybe her and Kiryu could develop their relationship a little bit. I mean, I did say some pretty negative things regarding that in my Kiwami 2 review, but hey, Maybe in this game they can get a little chemistry going, and who knows? Maybe it'll change my mind. Well, fuck then. Oh well, that's unfortunate. But hey, maybe Sayama could at least stick around or something. Welp, there's that then. And Sayama was never heard from again. She now lives on as an accessory for Sayako in Yakuza 7. That is the only bit of references or anything that RGG has given our girl since then. Wow. And I thought Sega's flagship Blue Hedgehog was bad with abandoned female characters. Please bring Blaze the cat back. Please. She better be in Frontiers. Okay? I'll fucking murder all of you if you don't put her in the game. Okay? Also, put Sayama as a party member in Yakuza 8. Please. Her and Shinada too. You can't just keep ignoring these characters. Fans love them. Bring them back! Getting back to the topic at hand, we eventually learn that two powerful politicians are planning to use Kiryu's land to construct either a resort or a military base. Oh, that's it. So Daigo and Nakahara getting shot must have something to do with that. It just has to. There's no way it's a coincidence. Looks like we're getting a little closer to solving this mystery. Now all Kiryu has to do is travel to Kamurocho and potentially dig up some more clues and beat the shit out of some big old baddies, of course. But not before some more of this dumbass preschool PBS kids-ass bullshit happens. Fucking Christ and the Ten Commandments. We are about to get into the nitty-gritty of this story. Shit's about to hit the proverbial fan. I do not give the slightest microscopic fuck about any of this. Daigo is on his deathbed, literal deathbed. There's another big conspiracy going on, and Kiryu's about to find some answers. But no! We need to absolutely destroy the Payson so it can focus on chasing a dog for 9 hours and then running around town to get shit for it. You know, cause we did that in the first goddamn game! Or, wait a minute, ooh, what about helping out a love-struck kid with his racist bitch with the burn arm? No, wait, what about that? What about this? What about focusing on some random loner-ass kid who gets in trouble with a strict mom for playing baseball with the other kids? This is the shit that really matters. Seriously, why couldn't these have just been side quests? It'd feel more fitting and it wouldn't hinder the game's main storyline either. Oh, and by the way, I actually forgot about that one baseball part because, my god, by this point, I gave so little of a shit that I just tried to speed through it so I could get the stuff I'm actually invested in. Or, you know, was invested in, until this sappy bullshit was constantly being crammed down my fucking throat. Oh, and by the way, throughout all this, there is not really many CGI cutscenes, and instead, there are and I mean a fuck ton of text boxes. So you'll just be spending much of the time reading this very engaging dialogue while listening to that obnoxious sound effect over and over again. Like, if the text sound effect was like Sans from Undertale, I might have forgiven it a bit, because that would have given me some hilarity. But no, it's just like... over and over again. Jesus Christ. And there are no skippable cutscenes either, as far as I know. No skippable cutscenes in this game. Like, isn't this just the greatest? Isn't this just grand? I am just having the jolliest time of my life. Hoorah! I really must harken back to that point I made before where this kid stuff should have been left as optional side quests. Because when it's mandatory like this, all it does is pad out the story, kill the pacing, and most of all, it just serves as a complete distraction from everything going on in the actual story. Like, really? Really? Do you really expect me to care about this stuff when two powerful Yakuza have been shot? A man who could be Kiryu's supposedly dead father being out and about and shooting people, and apparently Morning Glory facing a very possible foreclosure. Like, all this juicy detail is coming into play, and yet the game just wants us to do this, I guess. And I get it. I get why these scenes were put into the game. They're meant to establish some sort of motivation in the story for Kiryu. I totally understand why they're here. But here's the main issue. Why couldn't they have done this all in the beginning? You know, before all the main events occur? Had the game have spent just that second and third, maybe third chapter on the orphanage stuff, and then all the good stuff happens, everything would have turned out alright. Of course, there should be no reveal in the beginning like that. That's just fucking stupid. Spoiling everything right in the beginning, come on. It would have been enough to show us how important the orphanage is without having to sacrifice things like pacing, for instance. But that obviously doesn't happen, and instead, I gotta partake in some stupid kid drama while there are much more important things to worry about. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that the exact same shit happens again in Chapter 10. A man's life is in danger, and he has become the target of Kazuma, and is going to get a cap in his ass if Kiryu doesn't hurry the fuck up. Now, doesn't that just sound exciting? Like, you just know they're setting up for a boss fight against Kazuma, one of the very few good bosses in this game, mind you, and there's bound to be some emotional, heartfelt moments in this scene. But guess what? Oh no. Taichi got some food allergies. Haruka's got a job working for some shady people. And another one of the kids, whose name I can't be bothered to remember, runs off, and we have to chase her around the entirety of Ryukyu. Alright, I will give credit where credit is due, and say that Kiryu's interactions with the kids is cute, and it gives him some rather nice character development. I also really like how there's a little quest for each and every kid that resides in the orphanage. You know, giving every single kid the spotlight. It's nice. And to be honest, I like the kids themselves and their distinct, honestly realistic personalities. Like, I do plenty of kids who acted just like these. This is a honestly pretty good portrayal of kids in a video game. Each of the kids are different and having different problems, and watching Kiryu try to be the best dad he can and helping the kids out with said problems can be rather touching. What I don't like about these is really two big reasons. I've mentioned how they interfere with the plot constantly, but I've yet to mention another issue that I had with the Morning Glory stuff. I haven't mentioned it a whole lot because it's not just a Morning Glory issue, and instead an issue with the story as a whole, and that issue is the pacing. Oh, the pacing. Oh god, the pacing. I think the best way to describe it, aside from calling it absolutely horrendous, is to compare it to a roller coaster. Yes, Like a Dragon's 3 story is kinda like a roller coaster, in the sense that it's constantly shifting from slower than molasses to holy fucking hell that was fast. I've already mentioned how much a slog chapters 2 through 4 are numerous times, but boy, once you actually get to Kamurocho, the story quickly picks up the pace. And by that, I mean some of the chapters are incredibly brief, some of them only containing a single event. Take chapter 7 for example, where Kiryu learns that Majima is in cahoots with one of those aforementioned politicians, which inspires Kiryu to find Majima and kick his ass in the Coliseum so that he could spill the tea. And that is the entire chapter. That is literally the entire chapter. Walking over to Purgatory and participating in only a single scripted fight. That is the whole chapter. Chapter 8 is just one lawn battle and a boss over Laukalon, and that's all there is to it as well. Chapter 9, well, that one is also super short, but ironically enough, it might actually be the slowest damn chapter in the game. This chapter, oh my god. Oh, dear god. This chapter, if you wanted a prime example of how poorly written this game is, look no further than the good old half an hour exposition dump this chapter gives us. And no, that was not an exaggeration. Matter of fact, a half hour is a pretty rough estimate. It could actually be a bit more than that. Anywho, the entirety of chapter 9, aside from a very annoying fight at the end, is spent with Tamiya, one of the politicians, the one who wants the military base. Well, doesn't want the military base. explaining literally every plot point to us and the laziest, most rushed attempt to explain everything. Yes, a whole half hour is spent purely in Tamiya, explaining every single plot thread and having Date pretending to be shocked at everything he hears. Why couldn't we have just focused on naturally developing the plot instead of it having the entire plot chewed up and then spat in our mouths like our fucking baby birds? Why? Not only that, but some of the shit regarding the plot is just so fucking ridiculous. It is beyond belief. This is the worst soap opera I have ever seen. We all know that the series is all about crazy plot twists and shit, but this was about the time when the writers started to get a bit too carried away with it. Like, that Cosmo lookalike ended up being a secret CIA twin brother. Jesus Christ, give me a fucking break. Also, I love how this game tries to dress Black Monday as some sort of ambiguous threat. Yet we were literally introduced to them just a few chapters prior. No, Tamiya, that was not the CIA who attacked me in that alley. Literally anyone with half a brain cell knew that was a bunch of bullshit. Also, I especially love how even after this whole info dump, the game still expects us to believe that this dollar store Albert Wesker is a CIA operative. Do the writers really think we're that stupid or what? Anyway, like I said prior, the Kamurocho segment is blazing fast, and once you return to Okinawa, the pacing comes to a screeching halt once again because, like I said before, the daycare shit seems to be more important than the actual plot. So yes, we're gonna dedicate a pretty good hour and a half or so on this shit. God, this is so ridiculous. At least an entire quarter of the story is wasted on this when we could have, I don't know, focused more on the fucking villains? I get that underdeveloped antagonists is a pretty recurring theme in this series, but fuck man, Like a Dragon 3 is perhaps the worst example of this. The biggest issue I had with these villains is that none of them even interact with Kiryu until it's already too late. Hell, they're not even introduced until the 5th goddamn chapter. Nearly half of the entire story has gone by, and now we finally meet our big baddies. Even if the villains for the previous 2 games might have felt like they weren't developed quite enough, they at least had an established relationship with Kiryu right in the very beginning. I'm not going to use Zero as an example because that game wouldn't come out for another 6 years, but even then, the first 2 games had Nishiki, who was portrayed as a childhood friend and oath brother to Kiryu, who share a bond so strong that Kiryu even took the blame for the murder he committed. Fast forward to Like a Dragon 2, where Kiryu meets Ryuji and learns of his big scheme right in the very second chapter. Then here comes Like a Dragon 3, a game where our main protagonist doesn't even meet any of the major villains until the 6th motherfucking chapter. Now I wouldn't mind this that much if it weren't for the simple, excruciating fact that these villains get very little to no development. I can at least excuse Kanda, because he obviously wasn't meant to be much aside from the typical one-dimensional meathead, but Hamazaki and Mine are severely underutilized. The latter at least gets something at the game's final moments, but the former is such a frustrating example, and it truly annoys me just how badly this dude got the shaft. It's very clear that this man is a pretty significant threat, due to his cold, sinister demeanor alone, never mind his connections with the Chinese mafia, and how he became such a powerful Yakuza patriarch despite having such a small family. In his scarce appearances, he's shown to be a cruel, heartless, albeit cunning man, who appears to have a pretty stocky build as well, making him a pretty neat rival for Kiryu. Like, the very first scene with this dude shows him threatening a poor chef, one throat in a fucking duck head, and then proceeding to blow up his entire damn restaurant. What a badass! Honestly, when I first saw this guy, I was genuinely excited to see how he and Kiryu were going to interact. And with the bad blood Hamazaki had against Kiryu, I was very much looking forward to a potential clash between the two men. So imagine my disappointment when I learned that, literally 3 chapters following his reveal, he is said to have been kidnapped by the Chinese, and will be shunned from the rest of the story. Great. Isn't that just fucking amazing? Tossed aside like the piece of honeydew some asshole snuck into my fruit salad. Also, this is the same chapter where Mine, the final boss of the game, literal final boss of the game, speaks with Kiryu for the very first time. The 9th of 12th chapter is when the final boss of the game first interacts with our main protagonist. Let that sink in. This is also the only, and I mean only time they interact with each other until the finale, of course. And look, I like Mine as a character. I like him a lot. Hell, in my Kiwami 2 review, didn't I say he was my favorite villain or something? I found his little redemption arc at the end to be pretty well done, even if it did come at such a late time. I also really like how Mine and Kiryu have contrasting personalities, despite their similar upbringing. I honestly got the feeling that Mine felt sort of like an alternate version of Kiryu. And hell, as corny as this may sound, I'd even go so far as to say Mine is kind of like an anti-Kiryu of sorts. Think about it. Both were raised in an orphanage, but unlike Kiryu, who learned to be compassionate and caring, Mine has suffered a lot of trauma and neglect throughout his life, which had eventually led to the heinous actions he had made. And where Kiryu has always had a ton of people who cared for him and would consider him a friend, Mine really didn't have anyone. All the people he associated himself with were only in it for the money. That was until he met Daigo, the one and only person who actually recognized him as a human being and, more importantly, a friend. Then Daigo gets shot and falls into a coma, resulting in Mine's actions throughout the game. And this is where that whole clash in personalities aspect really shines in my opinion. Where Kiryu would have persevered and hoped for the best with Daigo's condition, Mine goes off the rails and starts doing all this evil shit. And this whole clash is represented beautifully in the cutscene leading up to the final showdown, where Kiryu desperately tries to get Mine to grasp the simple concept that someone's life will always have meaning as long as they continue fighting and never abandon hope. It's a really emotionally captivating and well-written scene, and of course, it just so happens to set up one of the most epic final bosses in the series. So despite how much I liked Mine, I still found his character to be pretty underwritten. For instance, I cannot for the life of me figure out his endgame because his motives are just so goddamn muddled and kinda just left in the air. Like, aside from putting him out of his misery, what exactly does Mine gain from killing Daigo? Tojo Clan chairmanship? But wouldn't that just be betraying Daigo or something? I don't know, putting the only friend out of his misery, then proceeding to take his position just doesn't strike me as right. So yeah, Mine was a great character and all, but his motives felt more like an afterthought, resulting in an overall confusing, albeit enjoyable character. On top of the 40 or so minutes worth of shit I've already mentioned, there were a few other things about the story that I didn't really like, but couldn't really give its own category. Hold your dicks, I'll get to the stuff I did like momentarily, but first, let me talk just a little more shit. Rikia's death scene was something that was kinda ridiculous, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, it was definitely a tragic scene, and Kuroda's voice acting is just top notch. However, it's how he died that gets on my nerves. Not only because it feels like such a contrived way to kill off a character, but this isn't even the first instance of this sort of death in the series. Like, there are literally 5 guys standing around, and yet none of them even bothered going for Tamashiro's gun. You're gonna sit here and tell me that it never occurred to anyone that the gun is literally sitting right next to the dude while all of you idiots have their backs turned? Seriously, this plot device where the protagonist speed up a villain, ignore his gun, and results in the character's death was already tiresome and stupid by this point. And like I said, it just feels so forced, and it makes the characters look like total morons. Oh, and by the way, this isn't the last time this happened. No, trust me, there's a far, let's call it better example of this plot device happening in Yakuza 4. And, oh yeah, I'm gonna talk about it when I get to it. Oh, it's a scene to remember, trust me. Another point I'd like to bring up is the wasted potential with some of the other characters. I'd already talked about how the villains weren't properly developed, but some of the other characters got the shaft as well, most notably Joji Kazuma. This dude is straight up neglected before the final chapter. They could have showed a much more emotional, stronger connection between him and Kiryu, but nah, They don't bother elaborating on anything outside of, hey, you look just like my dead dad. Wowzers, CIA twin brother, who woulda thunk it? Nothing is really fleshed out beyond that, and it just winds up being another piece of wasted potential. Hell, right as Kiryu is about to depart to Tokyo for the final battle, Kiryu goes to shake Kazuma's hand, to which the latter refuses, citing that the conflict has yet to be concluded. It's insinuated that the two share some sort of familial bond, and they're definitely setting up some sort of heartwarming scene between the two, only for Kazuma to never appear again in the story, aside from a single shot of him in a helicopter. That's really it. Literally, the final sequence just shows Kiryu saying goodbye to fucking Kazuki and Yuya of all. Kazuki and Yuya? What the fuck did they do? No handshake or anything with a literal blood relative to his adoptive father, despite hinting at such earlier in the game. What fucking gives, man? Jesus Christ. Anyway, I've spent who knows how long bashing this game to hell and back, so I guess I'll take the next few minutes or so to talk about the good stuff, because believe it or not, there is quite a bit of stuff to like about this game. My personal favorite aspect of this game is the characterization, no doubt about it. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Kiryu has never been written as good in any other game in the series as he was here, except for maybe Zero. Throughout a vast majority of the franchise, Kiryu is portrayed as this mostly blunt, stoic tough guy. Like a Dragon 3 fleshes him out and adds some extra layers to his personality. The way he interacts with the kids and does anything he can to ensure their happiness just goes to show how much of a caring and humble man he is. Not only that, but this game also shows a bit of Kiryu's humorous side as well, something that was not expected but very much welcome nonetheless. Most of his interactions with Rikia were just downright hilarious sometimes, most notably the way he makes fun of his fashion choices and his reluctance in letting Rikia call him Aniki. And speaking of Rikia, goddamn, you cannot convince me there's a better side character than this man right here. Endearingly silly, but also full of heart and determination, every moment Rikia is on screen is insanely memorable in a variety of ways. Honestly, his little obsession with Kiryu was one of the better aspects of this game. Just take a look at the scene where he pretends to be in love with the Kiryu in order to gain access to the hotel Kanda is in. His personality, charm, and great dialogue all combine in a way that results in a very engaging and unforgettable character. No wonder Kiryu had such a mental breakdown when he died. And the other side characters like Mikio and Nakahara are nothing to scoff at either. And despite all the shit I'd given them throughout the video, I gotta say, I actually kinda like the kids as well. Taichi was my personal favorite though. Ah yes, we can't review a Like a Dragon game without analyzing one of its most iconic aspects. The sub-stories are usually a blast in these games, but in Like a Dragon 3's case, I really can't help but feel like the side quests are a big hit or miss. And that mainly comes down to the overwhelming quantity of side quests there are. Seriously, there are over 100 sub-stories in this game, and most of them just feel like filler. There are absolutely some memorable side quests one would expect out of this series, such as the one where Rikia reconciles with an old friend, the one where Kiryu stars in a movie, and of course, who could forget about those fucking side quests with Mizuki and Akimoto. Yeesh, they're not gonna put that on the cover of Cosmopolitan. But anyway, a lot of the quests didn't really feel like quests at all, really. Much of them just had you undergo one simple, incredibly menial task, and that was about it. There's one where you take some ice cream across the street, and that's it. There's another one where you have to catch a Dynadasher, and that's it. And there's another one where you have to clear a bunch of hooligans away from someone's taxi, and that's the entire quest. They say less is more, and whoever came up with that quote more than likely played Like a Dragon 3 before they did so. Anyway, there's one last thing I loved about this game more than anything else that I just mentioned. The single best aspect of this game, without a doubt. This bangin' ass soundtrack, hell fucking yeah. So many bangers from front to back. the best battle themes, the most invigorating boss themes, and of course, the game that introduced karaoke, which has since become one of the franchise's biggest staples. Gotta love me some Kamurocho Lullaby. Also, I gotta give some props to the OST for including Fly, one of my favorite final boss themes in any video game ever. Like, really the only ones that compete is It Has to Be This Way from Metal Gear Rising, Wrapped in Black from Sonic Rush, of course, Silver Bullet from Devil May Cry 5, and of course, a few others from this very franchise as well. Anyway, getting back to what I was talking about, very good song for a lot of reasons. That sweet build-up with the violins before it fades into these bouncy guitar riffs, with subtle usage of Japanese folk influences. The way the tone of the track complements both the badass and emotional nature of the brawl, such a fantastic theme all around. Also, one other thing I liked about the soundtrack is how well it captured this Okinawa setting. Like Ryukyu Hummin' is a tune that just screams all-out brawl on the beach. I just love it. Like, go on YouTube and look up like a fight at the beach or something and put that song over it, and I guarantee you it'll fit pretty well. And I just so happen to love Okinawa in general too. Out of all the locations we've seen throughout the series, the best one in terms of presentation has to be Ryukyu. Such a gorgeous and endearing tropical setting that makes for a much welcome contrast between the bustling, cramped Kamurocho. Kamurocho looks alright too, but really it's Okinawa that seals the show in terms of presentation here. And while the setting definitely looks lovely, the character models most certainly do not. I don't know what the fuck went wrong during the scaling process, but oh dear god, some of these characters and NPCs look really uncanny. Kiryu and his football pads is a pretty solid example, but some of these NPCs just look hideous. It's not uncommon to see misshapen characters, or even characters who don't even look like they've been rendered properly. And no, this isn't because of the PS3 limited hardware or anything, because even in the PS2 titles, most of the characters and NPCs looked fine. Sure, they're wonky by today's standards, but for the most part, they were actually scaled properly. Thankfully, the scaling problem got fixed pretty well in 4, and fixed entirely in 5, but either way, the presentation of this game is a pretty mixed bag. Beautiful locations, but some pretty bad model scaling as well. Whew, okay. We done now? We actually finished? Okay, good. My apologies for making this video so much longer than my other ones, but I had just quite a bit of thoughts regarding this game, and having to condense them down to a single video was not an easy task. So, my mistake there. Anyway, time to wrap up my overall thoughts on this game. In case you haven't noticed yet, I did away with that weird old scoring system I used to have, and instead we'll be implementing a new one, and we'll use it in all my reviews from this point forward. It'll be a lot simpler, straight to the point more, and it will have ratings that are more accurate to the way I truly feel about the game. No more solidly high rankings for a game I dislike, simply because I just so happen to think the soundtrack and graphics were amazing or whatever. But anywho, starting with this review, my scoring system will be more upfront, and will feature the more traditional out of 10 formula. So there you have it. Now in mine, great characterization, featuring the franchise's best hub world in Okinawa, and even some smaller stuff like Revelations being a fun little way to unlock abilities. All those were great. The game also just so happens to have a memorable and endearing vibe as well. All of that is neat, but the bullshit with the combat, the story pacing, and even some missed potential with said story kinda soured the overall experience for me. Too much blocking with the enemies with too little damage output to make up for it. And of course, too much shit with the kids just kinda made this game drag on in a very boring and tedious way. I'm feeling a 5.5 with Like a Dragon 3. See ya bitches later.
If you're looking for Daigo, Mine's taken him up to the roof.